be presenting today on functional behavioral assessment and behavior intervention plans and a lot of data.
Who knows, right?
All right.
Okay, good morning. This is the third or fourth time I think I've been with this group, and so I see many familiar faces and a few new ones. So we're going to, in talking with Sherry, it's like, what do we want to do this year? She said, well, they seem to really like it when we practice with materials and do stuff to actually see what's going on. So we're going to spend a lot of time today actually thinking about what it is that we're going to do, how you break this down. But I want to start off by just seeing what questions people have, because you took a day, you're coming here. Obviously, I think you probably knew that the topic was going to be looking at behavior and functional assessment of behavior and the development of behavior plans. What issues or what questions or what concerns do people have? Because we can certainly try to meet those as we're talking today. Anybody have any concerns or questions? Yes?
What is realistic for the start of an FBA to the final production of a good plan? Because there are those people who think, hey, I don't understand why you can't have this done in a week and a half. And so we have some concerns over doing a good job. And is there any kind of guideline?
That's actually a very common question, and unfortunately there's not, because too many factors play into it. One is, how frequent is this behavior? If it's a very high rate behavior that's very public, obviously one can go in a short amount of time, get an awful lot of information. If the behavior is either more covert, one of the things that you'll oftentimes find is that as you go into the room, the student or the teacher will change their behavior such that the behavior doesn't occur. And as many times as you may want to go in there, you're not going to see the kinds of things people are concerned about. Or the behavior is just so low rate that you are dependent upon the information from other people. I would say in most cases, when I get involved in like an FBA, I can probably get the data and stuff collected in a matter of about 3 weeks. But there are some that stretch out. And that wouldn't be constantly through 3 weeks. But over 3 weeks, I can probably get enough opportunities in. The other issue is that how much data do you have or do you need? One of the things that we'll talk about today is that most of you collect too much data. And you ultimately start having this bunch of data that you look at, and you're going to try to make sense out of all of it. And sometimes it just actually makes the picture more cloudy. There are oftentimes a great deal of data on hand, and you don't have to collect new data. You can actually just analyze a lot of the stuff that's already there. So I would think that many functional assessments, quite frankly, we do get done in a week. It's not that big of a deal, because the behaviors, in some cases actually the behavior function is clear in the front end. Even kind of before we sit down, we really know how this is working for the child. The bigger issue comes down as to how does it actually play out. And oftentimes to collect enough data that you can convince the players that they have to change their behavior. Somebody was laughing when I first came in this morning that we need a functional assessment, meaning the people in this room. And I'll be really honest with you. I'd say it's a very rare behavioral intervention plan that I develop that does not initially require the adults to change their behavior. And that generally has to be spelled out and talked about very directly, and most of us do not like doing that. And so we want to do these hocus pocus things to change the child. The child's the last person that's going to change. If the context doesn't change, if the people interacting with the child do not change to make the contingencies different, either the antecedents or the consequences, and most oftentimes both, you, quite frankly, are probably not going to change that child's behavior. That behavior works, and the kid would be nuts to give it up. Okay? So sometimes the data collection that I engage in actually is more for how can I collect data that will allow me to sit with a teacher, sit with a parent, sit with the paraprofessional, and say, watch how this plays out. And to be able to do that without trying to put a black hat on that person. It's not that they're trying to do something bad, or that they're a lousy teacher, or they're a poor paraprofessional. It's that they engage in behavior that inadvertently reinforces or actually teaches the inappropriate behavior to the child. So that's a long drawn-out answer to the say, I don't know. There's no clear-cut question, or answer to that question. What other concerns do people have as you've been doing these things, or as you've been thinking about kids that you're working with?
I think a more recent concern for me has been, I work primarily with high school students and junior high school students, and we're dealing a lot with inappropriate teasing and bullying that's cyber-based. And this is behavior that's very covert. Kids can do it when they run into the restroom. They can do it, we never see it, but it's becoming increasingly problematic. And that's just an observation, I guess.
Right. There's going to be a journal, let's see, let me think, but Preventing School Failure. I don't know who the publisher is of Preventing School Failure. They are going to have a special issue in December of this year, all on cyberbullying. This is, and I know because I've got an article in, this is a brand new area for schools to be engaged in. And you're right, it's growing incredibly fast. It's very, very powerful. Kids do incredibly stupid things. And then other kids utilize that information and things to ridicule, and it becomes this whole new process. Now, the real dilemma here comes down to the fact that the most common thing you're going to see in the literature as far as prevention is to educate children about the computer, how to use the computer, all the different kind of protections there are on the computer. I think one of the things that kids don't realize is just how much stuff can be retrieved and how actually easy it is to find out who is sending stuff. The problem is that the best predictor of who is going to engage in cyberbullying are kids who experience or engage in other forms of bullying and are computer savvy. The more computer savvy they are, the more likely they're going to engage in computer bullying. What's the intervention we're using? Educate them about the computer. Guess what we're finding? Most of the common preventions actually increase the probability. It's sort of like drug, a lot of the drug and gang interventions. If you do drug intervention in your school, you actually increase the probability kids will experiment with drugs. If you do gang interventions in your school, the more likely you're going to actually trigger gang wannabes, kids who think, ooh, here's another opportunity for me. The same appears to be true with cyberbullying. So we don't have any really good answers for this yet. It's one of those areas that needs a lot more research. There are a number of good programs that are out there that allow you to monitor and catch keywords and different kinds of things that are going on so that you can see what's happening. One of the things that we're seeing a huge increase in is the number of kids who will, for example, I will write you a note telling you that I really, really would like to have a relationship and I think you're really cool. And this is usually guys to girls. And the girl will respond, and then what the guy is doing is putting these on the web so that everybody can laugh at how this girl responds to his, how much I care for you kind of thing. Or we're getting a lot more stuff in terms of where, and I don't know how these guys do this, but convince these girls to send half-naked pictures or full-naked pictures and then putting those on the web. And the big problem is you can't get that stuff back. Much of it becomes viral and it's gone. So it's a huge issue.
How would you thought, what's come out in my schools I've noticed is how the school can handle it. There's questions as to whether or not, because it's not happening in the school during school hours.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's like questions about situations where some administrations have said no, they can't do anything about it, and others have said based on the impact it's having, based on the school, our bylaws or whatever, it's saying, well, if it's showing a significant impact, you can then intervene and suspend or have disciplinary action even though the emails are going on or texts outside of school.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, and actually, if people are concerned about this, if you email me, I will send you kind of an advanced copy of the article if you just promise you won't do anything with it. But it has things in there, like there are the two things. The second thing that you said is correct. What's the Supreme Court and everybody else has said is that if the behavior has an impact in the school setting, All right, now that's got to be more than just somebody talked about it. You've got to demonstrate that this is having some sort of disruptive aspect to the school setting. If you can demonstrate that, the school can act on it if and only if the school has a policy around that. And there are numerous sites that will help schools craft or give you examples of well-constructed policies so that your school and your school board can adopt one, and that you can then educate the parents and the students as to what that policy is. But there are things that you've got to be careful of. For example, there was a school district, and you may have heard about this, who they gave computers. For example, in the state of Georgia, a lot of school districts actually give every child a laptop. I don't know where they get the money, but they do it. And because it was a school laptop, one of the schools was actually activating the camera remotely so they could see what was going on in these kids' worlds, and got a major, major lawsuit for violating the rights of their students, as probably well they should have. And I don't know what administrator thought that was a good idea, but somebody did. And so you do have to be somewhat careful what you do when you do these kind of things. Even if you own the programs, the computers, everything else, once you give it to the student has some rights with that material. So you really do want to have a well-crafted policy. But you're right, this is a huge issue, and developing behavior intervention plans is difficult for this, even from the standpoint of legally. For example, the state of Illinois has statutes around cyberbullying. What can happen is you can be imprisoned, you can be fined big time. What oftentimes happens is the student is then forbidden to have internet access for a period of time. The problem is, how do you actually implement that? How do you actually enforce that rule? The internet is so easy to get to, and I would be willing to bet you that the people in this room, most of you have multiple screen names that you work with, depending on what you're doing. So when you go on your dating things, you're Jason, I don't know, but whatever's going on, it's kind of the Brad Paisley song, right? When you go online, you lose weight and you become taller. But those are things that kids do. So it's a tough issue. I think the biggest problem right now is to just not get sucked in and say, gee, I'm going to pick up an article. It says education's the thing to do, let's do it, and think because that we're doing something. It's really something to give some serious thought to, because you actually might be exacerbating the problem.
The other issue is that there are some things that you can do legally, but then the problem is, how do you protect that kid? In the schools, there's only so much you can do, but there are things that happen, and they're afraid to press charges because they're still forced to be in the school with the other kids, and trying to keep them safe as well from ridicule. And even if they aren't, if they stay away from them, they're still bullied in another way because now everybody's safe. You know what I mean? It's like it ends up being a victim again if they do choose to pursue it or prosecute it from a legal aspect, even if the school can't do anything.
Well, the other side is that the police are not quick to want to act on these things either. This is one of those things that they want to plead out because they don't know what to do with it either. The other problem is that the vast majority of these situations will never, ever be reported to you. Why? Because if all of a sudden you're being bullied on the internet, if I go tell mom somebody is sending me something and bullying me on the internet, what is going to be the likely outcome of that? I'm going to lose internet access. All right? In today's world, all right, and we're talking cell phones and all this kind of stuff now, because all the different technologies that we have. So you're going to take away my cell phone, you're going to take away my internet access? No. And most kids, the other piece of this that comes into it is that most kids who are the victims of cyberbullying truly believe they should be able to handle this themselves. That this is not an adult-based issue. This is something they should be able to handle. So whatever you're seeing or hearing about in your school, probably about 10 times worse is what's really happening. So if you think you have a problem, you've probably got a huge problem. And it's again, it's one of those areas that the technology and the things have grown so much faster than our ability to respond to it. There are some good blocking programs, but one of the other sides of this is that most kids, even while they know that, don't put them on. So knowledge does not seem to be the answer. At least so far, the things that we know about in terms of what we can do, we'll educate kids around that, and it doesn't seem to make any difference. Other questions on that or other issues? Yes?
When you do your BIP, do you have to, or do you look up to see if it is research, scientifically conducted intervention? Or do you do something that you know that's been effective based on what you see? What do we do? Now that we've been hard to that.
The question is, do we look up to see whether the intervention is scientifically based, or do we use an intervention that's just been shown to be effective with this particular child? Actually, I guess the answer to that in most cases is both. Most of the interventions that you're going to be utilizing, at least in my experience, I would say the vast majority probably do have a scientific basis. So if I'm using a good applied behavior analysis strategy, I'm going to reinforce certain kinds of things, I'm going to use punishment or consequences. Those are all very scientifically based interventions. There is no big problem that I have to prove reinforcement works, or do I have to prove that punishment works, okay? In fact, one of the big issues is what I'm looking at, what's effective for the child. The only way I know if a thing truly, quote unquote, is a reinforcer is if it what? Increases the future probability of the behavior. All right? You can give me all kinds of wonderful things. So for example, if you guys said, you know what, Rick, if you let us out a little bit early today, because it's supposed to be a nice day and gosh, we don't want to sit in here all day, I have got a 5-pound bag of popcorn that I'm willing to give you. All right? I don't like popcorn. All right? I wouldn't cross the street for a thing of popcorn. Would that have any impact on me? No. Is popcorn a good thing? Would most people think popcorn's a reinforcer? Yeah. So by definition, it has to work for the child. Same thing with a punisher. It's only a punisher if it decreases the future probability of a behavior. Let's say I'm utilizing some sort of a cognitive behavioral intervention. So I want to do some decatastrophizing, or I'm going to try to help develop some self-regulation skills. Again, that's usually not a problem in terms of is it scientifically based. Does it work for this particular child? That's a whole other issue. In most cases, if you are taking data and can show the intervention is having an impact on the student, you're not going to usually run into problems of was the intervention scientifically based, because it's still data-driven. It's data-driven on the basis of that child. All right? Should I think about, when I'm thinking about what do I want to use, do I want to think about what's been scientifically proven? Yes.
And also, even a reinforcer like popcorn, they're only wanting popcorn when they're hungry.
Right.
So it won't be reinforcing all the time.
That's right. After I've had about 6 handfuls of popcorn, that's beginning to lose its effectiveness due to satiation, right? So we have all those things. Now, again, those are things we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about the fact that size, immediacy, satiation, novelty, all those things play a factor in the effectiveness of a given reinforcer, okay? The same thing with a punisher. If I want to use a punisher, because I see all of you, a number of you get this thing in positive discipline, positive discipline. One of the outcomes of some of the desire for positive, being positive, and all this kind of stuff is that the word punishment has become kind of a dirty word. Actually, from as early as 1968, and research by Becker and some of his associates, all positive programs, totally, just positive, no negative consequences, have generally not proven to be effective. All right? There has to be some kind of stop that says, no, we're going to stop this. The problem is when it becomes all we're doing is punishing and we're not teaching anything. So you really don't want to necessarily give up the negative consequences, and oftentimes these are naturally negative consequences or whatever's going on. But I don't want that to carry the day, and I can't anticipate that that's going to change behavior in the long haul for anything meaningful. But I probably have to have something in place to make the current behavior not so effective. Okay? Because most of us, let's say that you want attention, and you've got this great negative way to get attention. And I'm going to teach you and reinforce a positive way for you to get attention. What might happen? You would simply use both. Because you know what? Attention's damn good. And I don't care if it's bad, negative attention or positive attention. I just like attention. So you can teach me a new way to do it. I'll use that new way. But it doesn't necessarily mean I'll give up the other. Unless, in some cases, there's something to say, you know what? Probably not a good idea to use this one. Either we take away what's been reinforcing it, which is putting it on some sort of a level of extinction if we can control that, or we actually put some sort of a negative consequence in that when you do this, this occurs, and you probably don't like that. So if you have a choice, how do we want to push this? The other side of this is that when I use a punisher, some people want to use, and there's always this thing of I don't want to use more than I need, but if you use too little and try to just increase it until you get something effective, what you'll find out is that before it ultimately gets effective, you will probably be using far more negative than if you had simply started with just a tad bit more negative to begin with. The best example of this is like when we literally in the 60s were using electroshock to stop things like self-injurious behavior. If I gave small, light shocks to an individual that weren't effective, by the time I just raised the voltage, by the time it got effective, I was giving, I wasn't doing, but you'd have to give a far greater shock than if I just simply started with a little bit higher one to begin with. So when you're using a negative consequence, think about it from the standpoint of a couple of things. What do I truly believe will have enough of an impact to be effective? I don't want to be punitive, I don't want to be mean, I'm not trying to be cruel, but I also want to be effective. It's kind of like an antibiotic. You don't just take a little bit of dosage because you'll build up resistance. You can build up resistance to punishments too. So if you're going to use these things, and those become part of that scientifically based, and talking to parents about some of those things, and talking to teachers about that. If we're going to do it, the science is there to suggest we need to do it well. Okay? But the arsenal, especially around behavior, actually we know far more scientifically based interventions around behavior than we probably do anything else. Certainly more than we know about math. Okay? Other questions, comments, concerns? Yes?
Can you just talk a little bit about trying to change behavior? I always question, is this the behavior that a student can control, or is there some kind of diagnosis that would suggest that this is outside of their control?
Okay.
So you're still doing the same kind of functional and BIP on either child, but I'm not always sure that we really can impact the child who's, let's say, bipolar or something and going up and down and so anyway.
Okay. And I think we've talked about this a little bit in other meetings. One of the estimation is that about 96% of the behaviors that we deal with as teachers, as educators, are learned behaviors, leaving about 4% that are syndrome driven. Now, that doesn't mean just 4% of the behaviors are syndrome, but 4%, because some of these are more kids than 4% have it. So for example, if I have a child who's got bipolar, mental health issues in general, right now they anticipate that 1 in 5 children sitting in front of you has a clinical mental health disorder, and 1 in 10 that would be at a clinical level. Okay? So that number is growing tremendously. The number of kids with autism, the number of kids, all of these have a ADHD, have a biological substrate, okay, in which the behavior is impacted by emotion, anxiety, the chemical neurotransmitters, all these kinds of things. Does that mean it cannot be changed? No. Even kids who have that biological substrate, it usually is an interaction between context and that genetic, biochemical aspects that triggers many of the problems. So what happens is that can I begin to understand that? I'm not going to cure the child of being bipolar or autistic, but I can begin to understand what aspects of the context play a role in this disorder, in the display of these behavior problems. How, in fact, does the environment in some cases enhance that? I know I use the example oftentimes. If I've got a child with autism and I'm in a classroom, because we love this inclusion thing, right? So I've got them in this included classroom, and we're balancing algebraic equations, and this kid doesn't have that kind of math skill, and he sits in the room, and all of a sudden, and Olivia here is going to be my paraprofessional. I'm in the classroom, I start going, what's going to happen? Well, first of all, she's going to start losing air, isn't she? She's going to start going, shh, shh, shh. All right? So Olivia's going to spring a leak. All right? And if I don't respond to that and I just keep going, pretty soon somebody's going to take me out of the classroom. And I get to take a walk. Now, how stupid do you think I have to be before I realize this is better than this? I like the walk. Now, is Olivia taking me out to teach me an inappropriate behavior? No. Is she teaching me an inappropriate behavior? Yeah, she's kind of inadvertently reinforcing a behavior she doesn't want in a way that's probably going to increase the probability I will be making noises again in the classroom. Right? A lot of that happens in our schools. A lot. Now, part of doing the FBA is not just do I understand the clear function of what's going on with that kid, but I understand what are the contextual variables that seem to play a role in the display of this behavior. And while I may not be able to say, God, you know what, I'll bet my life this is the function, because it could be sensory, it can be all kinds of things going on in there. But I do know if I have this kind of a contextual situation, I am more likely to see it. If I have this kind of response, I'm more likely to see it. Or this doesn't seem to make sense, given what appears to be going on here. This consequence seems to be one that would likely be reinforcing of the behavior I'm trying to get rid of. And I'd say probably as many FBAs that I engage in, and then oftentimes before they call me in, it's a pretty tough case usually. I would never bet on what I think the function is. But I usually see that what we can do in terms of making this better. What could we do to increase it? The other thing I'm doing a lot more work with, we just published a book on cognitive behavioral interventions for kids with emotional and behavioral disorders. And just like in the 60s, early 60s, behavioral interventions were not things teachers had much control over. Quite frankly, it was just starting to come into the schools, and it was thought to be this is the clinician's job, to be the behaviorist. And they will direct you, teachers, because God knows you don't have the smarts to do this, without this direct intervention kind of a thing. We're kind of in that same spot right now with behavioral interventions. We're starting to see, okay, right now, generally you need some sort of clinical direction as to what we're going to be doing. Here's how we're going to be doing this. But we need to find these kind of things finding their way into classrooms, because for a lot of these kids, especially some of the mental health issues, a big part of what we have to do is build self-regulation skills. We've got to help kids begin to realize, can you feel yourself beginning to get anxious? When you do, and I may have to kind of guide you through this, because I can see when you're starting to get anxious. You may not be able to feel it, but can I help teach you when you start seeing yourself do this? Probably a good cue that you're getting anxious. What then could be some strategies to help you kind of decompress in those situations, or to ask for the need that you have a break, whatever the situation might be, and I'm going to teach some self-regulation skills. Where those things happen are in the classroom. They don't happen in the therapist's office. They don't happen in the social worker's office, the psychologist. They happen when you've got a quiz coming out in the math class. So you've got to be, as the teacher, people who are prepared to talk about those things and to interact with the student in a way to allow them to practice those skills. Am I talking too fast? Am I talking too fast? No? Okay. I tend to do that, so just hit me. So it becomes an issue where you're doing it for both cases, but in some cases, yeah, you're right. It's internal to the child, or we don't know what's going on.
The goal for that should be not to replace the behavior with something more appropriate. Like, I don't know about bipolar, because like you said, anxiety, that like you have a kid with ADHD, they're going to be fidgety, and they're going to have this problem. They're not medicated and whatnot, so it's not so much, that you're going to stop that, but you can certainly work with getting them to get that sensory input or whatever they need to keep in a more appropriate way, so it's not disruptive and they focus. So that's kind of what we should do.
Okay. So our point is, for example, that what you may be doing is teaching a substitute behavior that allows that child to meet the same kinds of needs. One of the things you'll notice, I don't have anything right now, but I've got just a little bit of ADHD myself, and so I'm almost always got something going in my hand. Now I can tell, actually, if I pay attention, how fast I manipulate whatever I've got in my hand usually is a very good indicator to me as to how anxious I'm becoming. And so I can oftentimes go, okay, this is starting, I need to get up and move around, I need to do something right now, because this is just not, I'm going to start looking like I'm really going crazy, instead of, I'll just even play with my fingers in terms of what's going on. But in some cases, I may have to teach a child to become aware of that. And then what are the things you can do? Now some teachers are quite open, quite willing to say, okay, look it, that's your seat and that's your seat. And if you need to get up and move, not a problem, here's how you do it, you walk around. Other teachers aren't. All right? Or I'm in an environment that's not going to allow that. What could I teach the student to do that would allow them to get some movement if they need it? So, can you ask to go to the bathroom? Can you ask to get a Kleenex? Can you, what are the things that are permissible in this environment that don't make you stand out? Or as kids get older, we'll find they don't want to look different. One of the other big problems that we have in alternative behaviors, and we'll talk more about this as we go into this afternoon, is that oftentimes we generate an alternative behavior that we think makes sense, but has absolutely no ecological validity for the child. They're not going to do this. They don't buy this. This looks stupid to them. I'm not going to do this. This is going to make me look different. This is going to make me look like a nerd. All right? So while we think this is a wonderful idea, and it's all laid out in the behavior intervention plan, and we've talked all the staff about how to do this, and every staff member says, oh, absolutely. If he hands me this stupid card that says break, we'll give him a 5-minute break. And he's looking at this going, yeah, I'm going to hand you this card in front of all my peers? I know. No, I'm not going to do that. All right? And you'll even get people who then get really crazy about this because he's got an option and he's not using it. Well, he doesn't have an option in his head because it doesn't have any validity. I may have mentioned this before. I do a lot of research on violence and aggression. And there is a social skills program you can purchase. I won't mention the name or who does it, but it was done by videotaping just hours and hours and hours and hours of kids actually in a detention center. And there was this really very, very savvy African-American kid. And he is a star. And he is the star of the thing, too. He's on all kinds of the examples. Well, we saw the rough footage before it was edited. And at one point, one of the people asked this kid, when you get released from here, are you going to use these skills that you've learned because you seem to be doing them so well? And the kid says, not on your life. And the guy said, why not? He says, it ain't me, man. Okay? So I can learn it. I can parrot it. I can do all these kinds of things, but it has no real meaning for me in my life and in my world. You're kind of wasting your time teaching it. So when you think about those alternative behaviors, think about who you're doing them for. Think about the, and again, one of the things that I think that we have to be much more cognizant of is the child's developmental level. What are the developmental challenges to that kid, and does this allow this student to meet those and not look funny? Okay, yeah.
Then when do we make the determination that it's just an inappropriate placement for them to be included? I mean, maybe you can get them to do the behaviors you want them to do, and yet it's still something that's beyond their capabilities. So you can get them to behave like you want them to do, but if they're still not, it's still not appropriate. When do you make the determination?
Well, it's if I can get them to do it, for example, in this environment. I mean, there's two questions there. One is the fact of generalization. All right. If the student's willing to do this, I mean, a detention center is kind of a funny place. I don't know if anybody's ever worked in a detention center, but you can get kids to do all kinds of things in a detention center because you've got them, their heart, soul, you got everything. You got them all day long. And so you get a lot of that kind of stuff where the kids will play the game and that has no generalizability out in the real world because the context is so different. Again, going to that scientifically based thing, if I am trying to teach a child a skill that they're going to use someplace else, I should be doing some sort of an ecological inventory of that someplace else. What are the kinds of cues, situations, examples, things that this child's going to confront in their real ecology? Now, I may start where I'm at, and it may be very artificial, but by the time I'm thinking about that kid leaving or being moved, I should be pretty close to the ecology that that kid is going to experience. If I see I can't do that, then that would be one of those things that I would begin to question, is this the place that I can actually teach these skills? And that might say this may not be the right placement. The other issue is, does it require an X level of expertise or an amount of time that's unrealistic given the realities of this this educational environment? That may be part of what leads me to say this is probably not the right placement. It's calling for expertise that we really don't have. It's calling for a level of intensity of instruction we simply cannot muster. Now, I'll be real honest with you. In the present way things lie, as a teacher, if you're not the parent or the person who speaks for the district, in many cases, the best you're going to be able to do is to present your professional judgment. And if that doesn't sway the group, which it likely will not, or it may not, you can write a letter of dissent. Okay? Now, some of you may say, well, that's an absolute, I may as well just turn in my resignation. If your school administrators are becoming more aware and more savvy, quite frankly, one of the things the state of Illinois is doing, I've been on some of the review teams, and they're slowing this down because of money, but where we go out to see if a school is actually following special education law, and we pull so many IEPs, a certain percentage of the IEPs of your school, of your district. One of the things they are starting to cite school districts on is if they find absolutely no letters of dissent. Because what they're saying is that if we had 35 meetings with 12 to 20 people in a meeting, and we've pulled, 35 of these examples, and there's not one disagreement, how likely is that? And so they're beginning to question that. It usually just becomes a thing to say, I want you to comment on this. And I'll tell you, and when we all do this, we have that kind of, I'm not going to say illegal, but questionable IEP meeting before the IEP meeting, right? Almost every school has it. And that's where all of us school people get together and go, what do you think? Yeah? And if you say no, we're going to go, come on, let's think about this. And we will discuss our differences until we have all of our ducks in a row so that when we sit down with mom and dad, we are usually a pretty united front. Right? That's not in the intent of the IEP meeting. The parents are supposed to benefit from your disagreements. So if you say, this does, the pace of instruction, the nature of this student's academic goals and objectives are not the same curriculum as this class. This is a curriculum and a curriculum requiring instructional strategies beyond what the teacher is prepared for. I do not believe this is the most appropriate or an appropriate educational placement for this child. Now again, it may not sway the team, but the parents are supposed to benefit from the fact that you say that, and let's talk about why you believe that. And you are ethically bound to, as a professional, to document what your feelings are and why, and it becomes part of the IEP. Okay? Now, depending on who your administrator is and what's going on, that may or may not be smiled upon, but you've still got the ethical responsibility. How you live with that, you have to look yourself in the mirror. Nobody else has to look at you, you have to. But it's a challenge. And it's becoming more of a challenge as the special needs kids are becoming the nail that pops up for all the AYP stuff. So a number of years ago when we were saying inclusion is the right thing to do simply because we really don't care about the academics, it's the social, it's the language, we're just putting them in there. That's not true anymore. That's academic.
I was going to say, using your example before of the autistic kid who's in an algebra class, and you could dissent, and then how do you then work on that behavior that isn't a result of, you dissent and you have either, like you said, powers that be, the parent or whatever is going to say they want the kid included. Mm-hmm. So how do you address that when you know that you can't get that kid out of that class?
Well, there.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have that all the time.
Right.
It could be that you're going, you might dissent, but the parent may be the one pushing inclusion. And the parents got lawyers, and the parents, because that's what I'm seeing all the time, and the parents are saying they want this kid, and it can take years to get them to see that this isn't the best place for being in Jenna. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, you end up walking that kid down the hall every day because you can't disrupt the other 30 kids in the class. And deep down that kid shouldn't be in there. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So then you're going back to that learned behavior, making a noise, and you bring them out to the hall.
Granted, there's so many things that aren't the way the world should be. All we can be, I can't be responsible for other people's behavior, but I can be responsible for my behavior. Now, if I'm a team member and I've given a letter of dissent, this is kind of going into a whole other thing, or if the team goes the other way, I'm still a member of that team, and I have an ethical responsibility to carry out the team's decision. Even though it goes against my belief, I'm only one professional. I shared my professional opinion, but there are other professionals, and the other professionals won the day. Okay? So I, in my best way, have to carry out the plan that's developed. Now, part of going to the data collection and anything else, there is never a functional assessment you're going to do that you're going to be sure this is the function or this is the behavioral intervention plan. It's always going to be a crapshoot. Part of the issue is that am I taking data to say, does this seem to be helping? Now, if I am inadvertently reinforcing the behavior, what's probably going to happen to that behavior? It's going to escalate or it's going to be maintained. All right? After a few weeks, it's time to say, you know what? Plan's not working. We are not seeing what we anticipated. We thought that if this was a problem and we removed the child, that somehow this behavior would be going down. That's not happening. This plan is not an effective behavioral intervention plan. It is time to go back and draft a new one. All right? Now, that's actually when letters of dissent become important. Usually it's when we go back at that, people start looking and going, well, what were some of the other opinions that we were talking about? Because this one didn't work. What's some other thoughts that were coming out in this group, and we should think about this. The other thing is that as you're collecting data and thinking about different kinds of things, I may have to refine this. As I've seen it's not working, can I do a better job of identifying what actually triggers the child wanting to take a walk? Can I get some, and actually even begin that process of refinement as we're going through this? Oftentimes, for example, children who don't comply. Most kids comply to some things. While I'm taking the data, I'll even note what did they comply to, because in any kind of compliance intervention, one of the things you're generally going to do is increase the number of times you ask a child to do something, because you want them to have opportunities to learn, just like you would if you were teaching math. If I want a kid to learn addition, I give them more addition facts. If I want a child to learn compliance, I give them more opportunities to comply. And I want a high level of success. So what should I be asking them to comply to? Things they're likely to comply with. The more knowledge I have of that, the more I can structure their day. And so part of what I might be doing as I'm kind of seeing this isn't working is trying to get more information about how could I better craft this? What would be a better way to deal with this? And these are tough issues. I mean, and we all have this. I mean, it's, every one of us is sometimes implementing a plan that we're going, gosh, this just doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't seem to be working. And most of us don't have enough time to keep going, well, let's go back and do one more. Let's go have another FBA and BIP. This is just so much fun to get together. What do I do with non-compliant children? Okay. Your comment, you made two comments here that are very, she said, what do you do with children who are non-compliant? You have some children who aren't interested in any reinforcers. Okay? I keep moving on you, don't I? I'm sorry. Just moving the camera. I tend to be a little, okay. Just by the second comment, it sounds to me like one of the things that you might be doing, at least in your head, is what we have been doing for years. Okay? I picked on Olivia, so we'll pick on Jamie here. Jamie is engaged in some behavior that either she's not doing something I want her to do, or she's doing something I want her to stop, right? Those are the two groups that we usually have the concerns with in terms of behavior. So we'll say that Jamie is, in this case, not doing something I want her to do, comply. What we start doing is sit down and going, geez, what does Jamie like? Oh, Jamie likes the computer. All right, Jamie, if you increase your compliance, you can have access to the computer. Do we do that? All right. From a functional assessment standpoint, what I am saying is that somehow Jamie is not complying because she wants to get to the computer. Does that make any sense at all? None. Okay? So we've got to stop just sitting down and thinking, what is the kid like? And I'm going to start using this kind of carrot and stick kind of, of an approach, and really trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. Now, Jamie might not comply for a whole number of reasons. All right? What might be some of those reasons? Huh? She's hungry. Okay? All right, she's hungry, she's tired. There's some physiological aspect that's just saying she doesn't have what it takes to get involved here. Her head, we've got a good Maslow hierarchy of needs thing going on right now. And achievement's up here, and I'm still trying to find a T-bone steak, right? I'm down here, okay?
Guys, anxiety is so high, no matter if you give him a reinforcer, it is never as great as the fight or flight situation that he's in.
Okay. In fact, with kids with anxiety, if I start increasing the reinforcement, what do I start doing? I start increasing the anxiety, because now I've got an added thing to add anxiety. They want this thing that they can't get. All right? So now I've actually, in some cases, actually exacerbated the problem. All right?
It's too risky to fail.
Okay? Yeah, if you think about motivation is basically the expectancy, all right, wait a minute. Yeah, motivation is expectancy that I'm going to be successful, okay, and value. Does what you get, do I expect to succeed? So if I don't expect to succeed, I don't care what you tell me I'm going to get, because I don't think I'm going to get it.
We can handle that, but I have a couple of kids like this, 8th graders, and they'll be asked to do an assignment, responses. This is meaningless to me now.
Okay. Is it meaningless to them? Why do you say that?
Because it's like the one girl that we have is very, very autistic. Talking about this drawing and how you can bring out the colors and how the shading. And she's artistic, but she's not to that level. They were put into play far more advanced artistic methods for her. Other things, it's just
Whose head are you working out of?
head,
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah. You.
Then tell me how to
That's, I mean, again, part of that's what you're doing is in the functional assessment is I'm trying to get into the kid's head. I'm trying to understand. Now, I may have to do some education around, so if I need to increase the child's awareness of something, part of the intervention might actually be helping the student. What would be, that becomes the roadblock. I think that their knowledge of this would help them. They don't value that. So my intervention now isn't getting them to do this. My intervention is getting them to even begin to see that that could be important. Why is that an important issue? So I may have to step back some in terms of an issue.
nonetheless. I mean, I don't think that we're doing our job if we say, you know what, there isn't any value to grade 3 education. I don't know that you need to know the Illinois Constitution. If you ask me right now, with a gun to my head, I would be able to answer this question. You are absolutely right. We are going to pass you on. And thank you for awakening us.
What is the, I mean, if you take it off the Illinois Constitution, is why do we make kids learn that one? It's a state law, all right? Is there a value to it? Yeah. Do you want to get beyond 8th grade? Okay. And I mean, and in some cases, that may be one of the, how many times have you had to do something that you know was absolutely stupid, but do you want to get what you're going to get?
But isn't that a pre-vote?
Isn't that a what?
Isn't that a pre-vocational lesson also that we're teaching them? Isn't that a form of a life lesson?
Mm-hmm.
That there are a number of things that I don't particularly give you in my job. One of which is talking to your mother who's crying and trying to explain why this functional analysis didn't really turn up a whole lot. However, I don't pick and choose. There are certain things, and one of the things that I explained to this student while she was in the meeting was that in order for you to continue through life, you will then take these honor classes in high school that will be far more impactful there are some behaviors that need to be put in place now.
And again, part of the issue is that, and I think this is again part of what it's that whole issue of motivation, expectancy, and value. Much of what you're talking about, where is the reinforcer? Way, way, way up there. There's no immediacy to that reinforcer. Work hard, do all these nice things, and by God, you will be a successful individual when you get out of college, kind of a thing. All right? Again, think developmentally. How old is this girl now? 13. What's a 13-year-old thinking about? Probably far more immediate kind of things. Do I look cool now? All right? Is being in an honors class going to make me be with the nerds when I want to be with the cool kids? All right? And I've got enough stuff going against me that I don't need to put any more pocket protectors on me. Okay? I need to be someplace down here. So again, it's beginning, and I don't know what's going on, but that's part of what you're going to truly look at in a functional assessment. In many cases, who's the one person who can tell you that stuff? The kid. And so one of the pieces of data you would certainly want to have, and it would have to be gotten by the person who she is most likely to be honest with, what's going on here? Now, they may or may not tell you the truth, but it would certainly be a piece of information I would want as to what do you value, what do you want going on. I would want to be watching in terms of who is she hanging around with, what are the kinds of things that seem to be valuable to her. All right? Now, again, the question becomes, if I want to structure an environment or context that's going to draw her to that, I never know what makes it do this, is that can I somehow work into whatever it is that's keeping her from doing it? All right? Can I reduce the impact of that? Or can I increase whatever she feels she's going to get by not doing it? Can I put that in place in what I want her to do? So let's say that it is somehow interaction with other kids. All right? She's got skills, she's got abilities. One thing I might think about as I'm looking at that is there a way that I could use some sort of a cooperative learning situation where she became somebody who teaches and gets involved with other kids as a way to motivate her, because now she can be able to do this kind of situation. And again, she may reject that. I mean, but those are all those things that you need to start looking at as to what seems to be the payoff for the current behavior that's not present for the desired behavior.
For a number of years with functional and behavior analysis has been that I'm a trained family therapist with a lot of experience working with families, and what I, in another life, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
And when I tried doing functional behavior analysis sometimes with staff and looked at the child's behavior, what's occurred to me is that what's missing from the whole process is understanding whether that behavior has a powerful reason for being that lies in the family dynamic. And that's something the child doesn't usually understand, almost never. And something that few people understand unless they sit and watch the child in the context of the family system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the oppositional kid, where interventions just haven't really done much to change that behavior, may be powerfully reinforced in that role in the family system, and nobody ever gets to it because nobody's looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because historically, school districts
Don't deal
go
with
there.
Yeah, that's right.
However, what it does is set up a very frustrating situation, in some situations with children
Mm-hmm.
and staff who are working very hard to try to modify or change the behavior because the really relevant clues lie elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Can I also suggest that the interpreters have a little trouble hearing because there's noise in the wall behind us.
Okay.
So if people don't want to ask a question, they wouldn't mind standing. It might be easier for the interpreters to understand.
Sure, and speak very loudly.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay? Yeah, thank you. I think you're right. I think families have always been kind of a bugaboo for schools. We know. I mean, in fact, if you ask most teachers, why is Billy misbehaving? in school, what will they oftentimes say is the most critical aspect of why he's misbehaving? Home, the parents, yeah. If you ask the parents why is the student misbehaving in school, what do they say the most common issue is? The teacher in the school. So the two people that have the most important role of making an impact see the problem from just the opposite side of the telescope. All right. We cannot compel parents to do anything. We cannot force them to be involved in stuff. Clearly, most of us do not, or nor do we want to take the time to go in and see what's going on in terms of family dynamics. If you mention that in an IEP meeting, you want to see an administrator go crazy. Just start talking about family dynamics as being an issue of why this kid's behavior is being impacted in school, because that puts the potential that family therapy would be whose responsibility? The school districts, okay? I used to work in residential treatment center, at a residential treatment center before 1974. We had a sliding scale. There was nothing in a meeting that the school would say, you know what, I think family therapy would be a really good thing here, and Covenant Children's Home has a sliding scale. You can pay as little as 50 cents for a half hour of counseling. I think it would be a really good idea. Education of All Handicapped Children Act comes into play. Now all of a sudden, if they're getting that half hour of therapy, the school is on the hook. And agencies such as Covenant Children's Home said, our cost is $26.50 for a half hour of therapy. We don't give it to the school for 50 cents. It's going to cost you $26. And all of a sudden, people didn't get family therapy. We didn't talk about family therapy. Now, as a ethical, concerned, caring individual who's on part of a team, and you're looking at the student's behavior, and you believe that home situations play a role in this, what could you do?
What I've done is spend a lot of time at the front end before I test a kid, trying to develop rapport and get some hints about, particularly if it's a kid where it's clear the staff is saying to each other, what the heck is going on here? We don't have a satisfactory answer. Then I would do the testing of the kid, and then I'd call the parent in the evening and be prepared to spend 1 to 2 hours on the phone with the parent, listening, asking questions, and beginning to get that parent to join with me as we look at what's going on with that kid. And what I have found is that I would like $1 for every time the parent has said about the second hour at some point, I wish I'd had this conversation. All of a sudden, my kid makes some sense to me. That something about my kid makes sense to me that didn't make sense before. It's not the same as a family system assessment. It's in some ways less satisfying, but if you can then turn around with some new, fresh ideas about what's actually going on in that family system that's affecting that kid, and take it back to the team and present it to the team in a way that people begin to, didn't know that. I mean, I've had teams that were able to generate some new thinking about a kid because of that one conversation that I had with a parent. It's the only way I've ever found a way around it. I've never had anybody, I mean, the whole issue of treatment falling on the school system doesn't happen.
Yeah, because schools don't talk about it.
And if I've done anything, it's been to encourage parents on their own get help with.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that.
Yes.
That's a slippery slope, because as a school person, the minute you say it, it's said.
But it's never backfired, not once.
Yeah, I know, but it has, but not maybe for you. But it has. One of the things that, again, I work with a lot of kids who are violent and aggressive, and one of the big risk factors is being in a coercive relationship. And so if I live in a home in which it's like, you do it, why? Because if you don't do it, this is what's going to happen to you. And it becomes this very, and the kids are coercive to the parents, and the parents are coercive to the kids. And that's a huge risk factor. Now, that in and of itself doesn't predict much. But guess what? What happens in schools? We are coercive. Most of the time we tell kids, you do it or else. Now you put this pattern and this pattern together, I have more than just doubled the risk factor. Okay? It has a much more powerful